Expectations were set at a high bar for Dangerous. This is following Michael Jackson's lucrative $65 million contract with Sony Music. Some have considered Dangerous as Jackson's artistic peak. This allowed sound experimentation, which often translated to numerous producers in the studio. And you know about that, Matt, and I'm curious, because Brad actually mentioned that you started with Bill Bottrell.
Yes, at the very beginning, I was one of the first people who started working on that album in the, let's see, I guess, what year did we begin
Well,
working
let's see, when was it released? In 91, November 26, 91. That's when it was released.
Then it must have been, I think, 88. I know Billy was in once. Billy, I started at Westlake.
Okay.
And then at some point, Billy Bottrell joined in another studio room at Westlake about a month or two later. And we worked for several months there. And then the project, Bruce came on board. And then the project moved from Westlake to Record One.
So right now, that was a good summary. Now, let me just ask you, in that beginning phase, what was that whole relationship working process like with Bill, you, and Michael?
Well, Michael had several song ideas. At the inception of the project, the title of the album was going to be called Decade, and it was supposed to be a Michael Jackson greatest hits compilation with 2, possibly 3 new additional songs. So when I started working on songs with Michael, and I worked for several months at Westlake, and I was working on potentially what was going to be one of the new songs. Bill came on board, and he also started working also on material that was going to be part of the new song material.
So that was at Westlake. Would you and Bill mostly spend a lot of time together, and then Michael would come in late hours, do vocals, or what was that whole process like?
The process was every day was basically something different. When it first started, it was just Michael and myself, and he would come in and he'd explain song ideas to me, and we would record and develop those ideas.
So he would come in with melody and lyrics.
Yes, we would generally start with groove elements, drums and bass. At a certain point, different people joined us. Michael Boddicker was with us. There were a couple other musicians. I'm trying to recall exactly who at what time.
So I'm just curious, now because I work with an arranger orchestrator, and I'm curious, like, did Michael actually come in with the music, or was it like you set up a rhythm section and you all just jammed and kind of the song was kind of getting worked out as you would go? How was that?
It would be dependent on what the song was. If the song was let's say a dance style song with that kind of driving rhythm, then the first element would be, what are the beats going to be? What is the drum and the bass? What is that fundamental groove, so to speak, of the song going to be?
And you would have musicians that would interpret that, or?
In some cases, it would be Michael and myself, and then other musicians would come in for individual parts. Sometimes someone coming in would be a programmer, in which case, if they would be programming drums or loops or samples or something, this would be the beginning of the process. Sometimes Michael would beatbox, where he would sing the rhythmic beat of the song, boom, boom, and then that would be a guide against which the drums and the percussion elements would be built. And this was when Brad Buxer first came on board in the same time era. Uh, I think he and Billy already were acquaintances. So after Billy was also there, sometimes I would work with Billy, he would work with me. Other times we would be in different studios,
Yeah.
sometimes in the same studio.
I read somewhere here that said that Bill brought Brad in as a technician at first, more
Yeah,
of a,
more or less
yeah,
as a technician in terms of the sampling capability that he had,
right.
and
And then just he
obviously,
developed to more.
yes, and as Michael saw his ability, um, um, obviously Brad was doing specific things uh, that Bill had in mind, working at Bill's direction. Bill was producing several songs. So when Michael started to understand Brad's capability and his understanding of music and music theory, then he would start writing songs more with Brad's assistance in terms of working out what the parts should be.
Mhm.
Because Michael would frequently have the music in his head,
Right.
and because I was not a performing musician, I wouldn't be the person either on a keyboard or a guitar that would actually be interpreting that and playing that music.
Right.
So there would be yet someone else
Yeah.
that would be joining us.
What are some songs in from that early era or even later that stand out in way of, I know there was Black and White, there was Heal the World, which I'm told it was one of his favorites, his all-time favorites.
Yes.
Um, what are some memories and some things that stand out to you?
Well,
Um,
actually,
or any other song that you remember?
two of the songs that we started that we did quite a bit of work on. One was the song "They Don't Care About Us."
Right.
Now, that song, although we started it at the beginning of the Dangerous album, uh, when the Dangerous album took shape, that particular song was worked on by myself, also with Bill Bottrell, and that was kind of shelved and put on the back burner because then that was revived, and that song was included on the History album at a later.
Okay, I love that song, and I there's a great video of that, that he did with, was that done in Africa or
That
someplace?
was done in Brazil with Spike Lee.
Okay, beautiful video.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, another song that was worked on at that time was Earth Song. Earth Song also was started at the beginning of Dangerous, and that was another song that Billy worked on and I worked on. And then that was shelved later to be resurfaced, and it was finished and included on the History album.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay, so go ahead.
no, there were a couple other songs in the very, very early phases that were some ideas that Michael had. And one of them was Heal the World.
Yes.
Well, actually, he started that as Feed the World
Oh, okay.
because of the famine situation. And then later the lyrics morphed into Heal the World as Michael continued to write and develop the idea.
Right, right.
So that was another one that we started in the very early phases.
Yeah. What else can you tell about, those specifically, let's think about those songs and then arrangements, orchestration. Who else was contributing? I know Teddy Riley was also involved. Um, what are your memories from?
Well, actually, when it was Billy and myself, and then at the beginning of, I forgot what the year was. It was the beginning of, I think we started in,
So you must have started in the late 80s or,
yes, I'm trying to remember exactly the year. Without my notes, I don't have the exact
yeah.
date. But when Bruce came on board and we made the move to Record One, then Bruce joined us.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in the B room at Record One,
Right.
and Billy Bottrell was doing some work then at Smoke Tree. So he was working at yet another studio. And shortly after that period of time, probably 6 months went by, Then Brian Loren.
Oh, right. Of
He
course.
was the first or the very next person to come on board and to work with Michael.
I remember, yeah, Brian
And
Loren.
and then there was Brian Loren and his engineer. Um, oh, escapes me at the moment. Richard Cottrell.
Okay, right.
Richard Richard Cottrell engineered for Brian Loren, and then they took over working in the B room at Record One, and Bruce was still in the A room there.
Mm-hmm.
And
The A room, yeah, that was the big, the blue room with all those big speakers, and I know that Michael loved to hear very loud volumes, so
yes,
he,
oh yes,
the SSL room, and I do recall that, for I guess it must have been towards the middle or the end that you pretty much took over the whole building. I mean,
yes we did.
Michael used that back room as his office where you were working in B, and then the A room. So I mean, just it's not a huge studio, Record One, but you took over.
Well, yes,
Right.
what we did at that time, Alan didn't have the SSL
Correct.
installed yet. It
That's
was the
right.
API in the B room and
That's right.
the big Neve, or the old Neve, the
Yeah.
big old Neve in the A room. And you're right. One of the advantages that Michael felt moving from Westlake, because the Westlake building, there was a shop for maintaining electronic equipment. There was a sales department. There
Yeah.
was a
Not
rental
as
department.
private.
There were other people in the building.
Yeah.
So when we moved to Record One, there wasn't anyone in the building that wasn't specifically working on the project.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that made for a great deal of privacy, which
Is that when Michael had his own chef that he would come and was that
yes.
the period?
Well, she did that for the Bad Project as well as the Dangerous Project.
Yeah.
Catherine was the woman who was the chef,
Yeah.
and she would come. Basically, Fridays were the day that we got an actual.
And what was that food like? Because
Oh,
I heard there was there was a period also, I'm not sure if it was that period necessarily, but it was super healthy. And then it was combined by junk food afterwards, or,
well,
or a good combination of.
Michael was vegetarian at that time, so very often he would be eating vegetarian, but I can't say that his favorite food was nachos. Now
That's what I meant.
I
Yeah.
can't say that's really a health food item, but Catherine made absolutely delicious, healthy foods,
Right.
and her foods were uh, top in terms of health, natural food, but they also were a little bit more
Some variety.
a wider variety, a wider selection. Typically, she would do a fish item
Yeah.
and a chicken item. So they were healthy alternatives.
Yeah.
Sometimes Michael would participate in something that was other than vegetarian at that time.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, uh, to just go back to the subject of, again, the album itself and the songs and really kind of the era. This is all under the era of what I'm calling the 90s, the platinum era, where albums really stood out, and commercially they were quite successful. And I'm wondering what you contribute that to. Obviously, it was an era where making albums made sense. It made business sense for labels, and the returns were rewarding, both for artist and label. I mean, when you're talking about Jackson had spent $10 million to record Dangerous, it's been said. So, and I remember, some of the invoices, just the studio,
yeah.
$3,000 to $4,000 days just in studio cost, and then just add that. But that album has made a lot of money, so the returns were justified.
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Why is
Well,
that not happening anymore?
I think by that time the music business had so fully embraced the album as the pinnacle. I
The
mean,
format.
everybody wants to have a hit single, but to have a number one album on the
Right.
charts, and for the record label, that was obviously a greater revenue than just selling some singles.
Song, one song, right.
And for the artist, if the artist was the writer of the majority of songs on the album, then he would be enjoying greater incomes from his publishing
Mm-hmm.
if he's the writer and
Yeah.
he's self-published. So it was kind of a win-win thing economically, and albums gave artists the chance to stretch out that thing that they did and explore a little bit more.
Well, you were there with Dangerous. You were there, I know, at Record One at least a year.
Yeah, I know it was over a year.
Yeah.
I want to say
So,
that we were there from the beginning of 90 to the end of 91. I'm just,
and you corrected me when we were having a conversation last time. You said, you know, because I had read that there were about 60, 70 songs, and you said maybe not that much, maybe about 50 songs. Going through that many songs to come up with a full album.
well, yes, because if you count all of the songs from all of the different producers, now Billy Batrall worked on several different titles with Michael. Brian Loren worked on, I want to say, as many as 10 or 12 tracks, none of which made it on the album.
Wow.
Then there was another potential minimum half dozen up to 10 groove tracks that Teddy Riley brought to Michael Jackson. And I don't know how many of those songs ended up in the final form, if that was 5 or 6 songs, I believe. Then there were the songs that other people had brought to the project. Bruce and his partner in music, what was his name?
Was it? Let's see. Hmm.
They did a song Jam.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and then there was
Brett Lawrence?
Brett
Brett
Lawrence.
Lawrence did something.
Yes, he was. He did a lot of keyboard work.
Yeah.
There were the songs Gone Too Soon and Will You Be There. I worked on those songs. And I sometimes I would work on developing Michael's songs ideas. One of the things that happened, just as a quick background note,
Mm-hmm.
the different engineers and the different producers each had kind of a different thing musically that they provided. Bruce, the big lush R&B, it was his sound.
His department.
Totally his department, and he did an incredible job. Billy Batrall did some of the rock and roll and some of the more quirky songs. Brian Loren was doing the really funky kind of stuff because he was from Minneapolis, so he had that Minneapolis sound.
Right.
Teddy Riley was doing the New Jack Swing, so he was kind of on that leading edge of what was the hip hop movement.
Right.
And I did not have a particular sound. In other words, my goal when I walked in was what's in Michael's head and how can we get that out? And how can I facilitate that without necessarily saying, oh, Michael, I think it should be this way, or I think it should be that way. I always saw my position to really be the one who was interpreting Michael's thought process.
That must be why Brad remembers that Michael liked you working with you.
Well, that was actually my function that I did for many, many years on many projects.
Yeah.
Starting with the conclusion of Thriller up through including some songs that I worked on during history. So that was a span of over 10 years, just in that capacity.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you just said as far as getting like a specific example or two. He's like humming something, and for you had to think of a certain, effect, box, microphone, or something, and something that you haven't even done before, maybe something new. Um,
Yes.
what was
Well,
that like, and what did you use? Can you be more specific, like let's say on a certain song or that you, um,
okay. Usually when Michael had some kind of an idea, what he would like to do is capture at least the kernel of that initial thought. So if he had a particular rhythmic pattern in mind, boom, pa, boom, pa, boom, 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 pa. So I might work with him. It might be the two of us just developing that by him playing some different things percussively and just seeing what kind of a groove idea he could develop. He might be hitting sticks, boards, anything that he could. We might have a drum machine and it might have drum sounds or samples into it. Sometimes I would work with him just establishing that very most basic uh, uh, pattern or idea. When it came to developing more specific drum patterns, then someone who was a programmer on a drum machine might join us. That could be Brad. If it was chords and Michael wanted chords from a piano-ish sounding keyboard or a synthesizer, then he would be explaining his ideas to whoever that musician was. If it was Bill Bottrell, while he could play some things on keyboard, he was much more guitar based as a musician.
mhm.
So he would play something, he would play some riffs and some chords on the guitar. So typically it would be Michael Jackson, myself, and then it would be somebody else who would be the actual performing musician of whatever component it was that Michael would want to start that with. So if it was a ballad, it would more than likely be a keyboard. If it was something funky or rock, it would be a guitar. If it was something that was dance oriented, then it would be drums and bass.
Yeah.
So
Again, having that freedom and expertise of so many people to spend the time to come up with these ideas that so that was the sort of what the era. Now budgets are much tighter. Artists are um, they're not experimenting as much, perhaps. I don't know. Again, some are, but the 90s, I'm trying to also differentiate what were different about that, what was different about that era that allowed albums to do so well, you know.
well, that was also the beginning of, although it was a continuing pattern, it was also the development of the technology,
Absolutely. You said
like
it because,
the ADATs and the home recording,
yeah,
which really helped people organize their thoughts creatively and write songs more effectively. But people still wanted to go to a real top line professional studio
yeah,
when they were making their album that was going to be the serious recording.
yeah.
The at that point that technology was aiding the process, and maybe there were a few independent artists that were creating their own albums by that means, but all of the people who were serious professionals, that was more of a songwriting tool than an end unto itself.
Yeah, and not to mention, speaking of technology, that this was all before streaming.
Yes.
So the streaming world, with Spotify and everything, that just changed the landscape of how music was being consumed.
Yes.
And that probably had a big role in, how people were listening to songs versus albums.
Well, it was, and this I think was probably the pinnacle of the era of the CD,
Yeah.
because that by that time that was the single format. I mean, maybe there were some labels still selling and manufacturing some cassettes, and maybe a little bit of vinyl, but the CD was really, that was the number one medium that everyone
Yeah.
embraced.
Jumping back to again that era of making dangerous, what are I know you emphasize a lot when you work with other artists about emotional content, and it must have been so amazing to listen to those songs that we know and love even today, that are hits. Now everybody recognizes them, but for you, for the first time, to actually be behind a console and listen to the big speakers, well, and it took a while, of course, to get there, but once you really got there, it must have been so rewarding.
Well, it was because as Michael's production style and the way he worked was, if you were a band and maybe four guys all walked in and they sat or picked up their individual instruments and everybody said, okay, let's do this song, and everybody played the song down, then you would have the representation of all the different musical parts.
Yeah.
Michael did that process, but it was done one instrument at a time, and it was layered by multi-track. So things grew at a slower rate, and it gave Michael time to fine tune and adjust all the parts. And then as those individual elements would start to grow and take shape and take form, that would inspire Michael for what that next thing that was that he wanted to do, either in the writing fashion or in what he wanted to do in a production fashion, the types of sounds that he was looking to explore.
Yeah.
He always wanted something that was new and different.
Yeah. And I relate to that because I also heard it again a lot of times secondhand, third hand, because I was hearing it from assistant engineers, from mixers, producers. And Dr. Dre, when he did Aftermath at Record One for a year, was exactly the same way. It was just almost like this big research laboratory going on, of exploring what are the new sounds, how, what's happening, culturally. And I mean, there was a lot of thought put into all of it.
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, there's got to be to be in the middle of the storm that you were, and at the same time, just kind of be there. I mean, what were your days like? You would just come in like 10, 12-hour days, or?
They were anywhere from through the normal stretch of the album project. They would be anywhere from I would say 8 to 10. Obviously, when you would get into the closer to deadlines, they would start getting longer. And one of the things that we did quite a bit was what new instruments or synthesizer sounds had people programmed or developed. When a company like Yamaha comes out with a whole new line of keyboard instruments,
Right.
and there's a whole bunch of new sounds on them. I mean, the other companies that did that were Roland. They would issue a new thing, and they'd have new sounds. And then the technology itself that was driving the development of those musical instruments was also expanding.
Very good point, because I'm sure some of these manufacturers were also kind of, they wanted to, show their current stuff to you, not necessarily for endorsements, but just to get on this album,
Yes, that's true.
And so how much of your time was spent on that? Because, God knows, I mean, you had your hands full, but then trying to kind of learn new technology or a new instrument, or,
Well, if a new piece of technology came along, a new instrument, it was, how could this be utilized in some new fashion to create something new?
Yeah.
Now, that might mean, oh, it has some new sounds that no one has heard before,
Did
or it might.
anything stand out during that year that became like a, part of the production? Or
Well, one of the big instruments through that whole era was the synclavier,
uh-huh.
because that became more and more refined, more powerful in its capabilities. And it became a true recording system of its own, as well as being a sequencer and a sampler and having built-in synthesizer sounds.
Yeah.
So that was one of the big advancements. I know Fairlight had also equipment out there. They were trying to compete, but Synclavier was really, they were really at the forefront of a lot of that development of digital
Mm.
technology and manipulation of sound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are some uh, fond memories from that time? Something that just really like you went home and you thought, wow, and sometimes, Matt, when I think about you and you work with new artists, other artists, I think, wow, after you work with somebody like Michael, you know, I mean, it's at the pinnacle.
Yes.
But you've been so gracious and accommodating in a way. So I don't. That's just your love of music.
Well, it is. I mean, every single session I've had, all the people I've worked with, especially some of them being very successful and notable people. I mean, to me, when I have the opportunity to be in that situation, uh, I really want to know what's going on. What can I learn from this? What new things am I going to be exposed to? Because inevitably, every single project I've worked on,
Yeah.
there is something new that comes along that I have to face. And because on many of the albums that I did with Quincy, my credit was that I was the technical engineer, because I was doing, at that time, all of the technology that allowed them to create those records.
Yeah.
But that it's that evolved from just being a specialized person, because when the equipment became very consumer friendly, then everyone could have access to a greater assortment of technology.
Yeah.
Which meant then, if you're working in the studio with Michael, then he wants to know what's even the newest of the new.
Yeah.
So there was a constant challenge, but for me it was just getting in with people and the whole collaborative mindset
Mm-hmm.
to me was something I found very challenging. And if you walked out of the studio at the end of the day and you had really done something creatively, that was really an accomplishment. You felt good.
Yeah, I bet. Tell me a little bit about recording Michael's vocals. What was that like? I do remember one incident. By the way, I met him only once, and that was at Ocean Way, 6,000. Bruce Sudin was doing a string session.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably not during Dangerous, but he came in disguise, and I actually walked him down the street to his studio. So no conversation, but it was just amazing on Sunset Boulevard. That was the only time I met him. But I also heard, like I said, I used to get things second, third hand. And somebody said that at one time he liked to do vocals in the dark. Is that right?
He did. He really, when he was performing, especially vocals, because some of the songs, when you listen to some of the ones, especially the ballads, they're real intimate, and he likes the mood. He likes to set a mood.
Yeah.
So the lights might be down very dim. They might be completely off. They might only be very dim in the control room.
So that's true. See, I thought that was just rumors, because the other thing is that was that on every song, or was that just sometimes?
Well, that was usually some variation of that. It might depend song to song, but Michael really liked a really subdued thing. And it's a thing that studio people come to realize. They say the thing that someone who is blind, because they don't have the sense of vision,
right,
their hearing compensates and it becomes more acute.
Uh-huh.
Well, that is actually true of
It's
any human
true.
being. If
Yes.
you were just to close your eyes or turn out the lights, and then if you were to have two speakers placed at that perfect physical location from you, and they were high quality speakers, and you sat in the darkness and listened, you wouldn't be distracted by any visuals, and you would probably hear more
That's
details
right.
than you would if the speakers are in the other side of the room.
So he knew that intuitively.
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
But also, too, he knew that from performing on the stage, because, you know, you're on a stage, the spotlight is on
That's
you.
right.
Sometimes the lighting is such that you can't really detect how big the audience is.
Yes.
So it would be something that he would love, that mood of it being very kind of intimate and very focused.
Yeah.
And he usually would come prepared, and usually he would have his vocals, his lyrics for his vocals memorized. Sometimes he would uh, have notes, and typically he would be making notes about maybe to accent a line or something, but he usually didn't always need lyrics to sing to. He usually would have them memorized. It depended on maybe where in the development of the song it was.
Yeah. 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 Very nice. Any other things that you remember with the vocals that,
Well, for Michael to do vocals, I mean, it was just a matter of capturing. And
that perfect, huh?
he was such an amazing vocalist. He knew how to work a mic.
Mm-hmm.
He knew exactly how to use the proximity effect is when you get closer to the mic and your voice gets bigger and huskier. He would know exactly how to use that dynamic element of how close he needed to be or how far back. He would frequently record his own backing vocals, which meant he would sing all of his own harmony parts.
You mean
And the harmony part,
pre-record or do it there with you?
whoever was the recording engineer, he'd say, okay, this is how I imagine the backing vocals or the harmony vocals for this particular song. In some cases, it would be him. In some cases, he would want other people's vocal characters to be the backgrounds.
Yeah.
But he would always sing a basic and then a double of that line, of that first harmony note. Then he would sing the next harmony note, a basic and a double. Then it was 3-part, another basic, another double. So it would be very typical that he would sing 6 tracks of backing vocals.
Wow.
And he would always know in his mind, he would always know the difference between the basic, which is the first time he would sing that note, and then the double of singing that note. Because he always would know the basic is going to be on the left, then the double that accompanies that would be on the right.
Yeah.
Now, this is the interesting thing. He would sing, say, backing vocals for a complete song, and he would know in his mind if he was singing the basic or the double, because sometimes he'd say, is this, he'd ask for clarification. And when you listen to Michael's backing vocal songs, and he does those little tiny ad libs, those tee-hees and those ahas and those, you know, those little sounds,
Yeah.
in his mind, he would know exactly what the stereo image was of his backing vocals, how it was going to sound. And he knew on which side he wanted to place every single ad lib at what point in the song. So in his mind, he had a complete roadmap.
Interesting.
Of the entire vocal arrangement for any given song.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
That is, but that's just shows to you a level of, number one, and his accomplishment in his ability to arrange his own voice and know exactly what he wanted the result to be, and how he needed to perform on the recording to get those results. He knew that from a lifetime of being a performer and working in the studio. That was second nature to him.
Experience, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, we talked about, we didn't, did you work much with Teddy Riley?
A little bit. Teddy Riley had his own engineer. That was
Okay.
originally Dave Way.
Yeah. Well,
And
since Bruce could not be, that's right, Dave Way, that's right.
yeah, what occurred there was when we were working at the Record One building, and Brian Laurent, first I was working in the B room, then Brian Laurent and Richard Cottrell worked in the B room.
Mm-hmm.
Then Teddy came on board, and Brian had kind of finished his a lot of time. But when Teddy came in, Teddy said, well, I don't really know these API and these Neve consoles. I want an SSL because that was what he was familiar with. That's what he knew. So because of that, we then booked Teddy Riley into Larrabee North in Lancashire so
Right.
that he could work on the console
Mm-hmm.
that he was familiar with operating.
Right, right. Wow. I just remember, those Mitsubishi machines, and oh my God, those were so, they don't exist anymore, do they?
Well, they do, but like all tape machines,
No.
people pull them out when they need to
Yeah,
archive older recordings, but
that's right.
everybody's on
So,
hard drive.
so what was Bruce's relationship with, since he's not here to, you know, um, tell us much? What was his connection with Michael? How did that work? You said his specialty was more doing ballads and, was
Well,
handling.
a lot of the R&B, that rich kind of R&B sound, Bruce, nobody did it as well as Bruce. That was what he was known for.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce came on board pretty much as a not just an engineer, but also as a co-producer.
Right.
So it was Renee. Renee Moore was Bruce's partner on the songwriting of Jam. So Bruce co-produced, I believe Renee as well, they co-produced the song Jam with Michael. So it was that song was a collaborative effort. On some of the other songs, Bruce was acting as co-producer on Michael's songs. Some of the ones which I had initially started, and then they got to a point in their development where it was time to move that into the finishing phases of overdubs and arrangements. Typically, people would be brought on board for very specialized things. Rhett Lawrence was brought on because he was a very good synthesist and keyboard programmer.
We also, when it came, I read on I think it was on All Music that Johnny Mandel,
Yeah.
Glenn Ballard, Marty Page,
Yes.
they were all, I guess part of the arranging, orchestrating.
Yes, Jerry Hay. When Michael knew that specific thing that he was looking for.
Did you say Jerry Hay also?
Yeah, Jerry Hay, because of the Seawind horn section.
Right.
And Jerry Hay also arranges strings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think we used Elmer Bernstein on Dangerous. I know Elmer Bernstein came on board for History.
Huh.
But Michael would want to go to that person who was really the person who had that kind of signature style or sound.
Is that because people were recommending it, or he was actually listening to all these albums?
Oh, he was listening.
Yeah.
Many of these people were people that he had worked with previously, either with the Jacksons or maybe on projects with Quincy.
Right.
He loved Paul Jackson Jr. His two favorite guitar players were Paul Jackson Jr. and who's the other one now? David Williams. So David Williams was the funky guitar player. He could play the real funky stuff. And Paul Jackson Jr. played a little bit more of the R&B, a little bit more of the smoother, You know, the absolutely beautiful phrasing. So he would know somebody's style, and
Mm.
then that would be a person who he would contact when he wanted a particular thing. Um, I'm trying to remember if Steve Porcaro was with us
Oh yeah, I think I saw
on
that
the
someplace.
Dangerous album, and Chuck Wilde may have been as
I mean,
well.
you had a great set of musicians, I'm sure, on the on most of the albums, but this one too. Um, you know, what was the when it was final, when it was all done? What was that like? Was Michael into sort of celebrating, recognizing people, or it was just like, okay, we're done, let's go home?
No, it was what happened was towards the end of the album, as it started, the conclusion was definitely on the horizon. Could we, as we had worked over 2 years, I think we had worked 2.5 or 3 years maybe at that point when we got to the conclusion. What happened was there were so many songs that were so good, and Michael really liked songers that were longer. He liked really long groove things because he liked to be able to dance to
Right.
that groove. Well, what we realized was we either had too many songs, or the
Or
songs
they're
in,
too long.
were in a cumulative sense
Yeah,
added up to too much time.
yeah.
So what we did frantically was, as the mixes were being done, they were being mocked up in terms of editing, and there was this process between the final mixes in mastering and editing, and there was a room at Bernie's. We were mastering with Bernie,
Hmm.
and then we put John Van Est
Oh yeah.
in Brian Gardner's room at Bernie Grundman, and he was simply editing. And there was somebody at one of the studios that was editing songs, and then this, the edited version had to come to Westlake, or had to come to Bernie Grundman's, and that would be mastered and put in. And every time a song was inserted, then everybody would be doing the math. At that point, I had a time calculator because, as you
Oh my
know,
God.
a regular alphanumeric is based on 10. So
Right.
you have to have a time calculator based on minutes and seconds when
Right.
you're adding the running length of an album together.
Yeah.
Because at that time, there was a theoretical limit of, I believe, 77 minutes. And it was something like 77 minutes and 10 seconds that the record company said, that's the maximum, can't do anything any longer than
Right.
that.
Right.
So there was this constant interaction between what can be edited out of songs.
And did Michael have the final say, or you know, like certainly his?
Yes, he did.
Mhm.
He had the final approval, and he wanted, of course, all the songs to be longer,
And
but
also in the selection of the songs.
it was, and that was the point of contention, or I should say, that was the issue that we were facing.
Yeah.
How can we be sure that we fit all of the songs that Michael wants on this album? How can we physically fit that much time on one
Right.
disc?
Right.
And when it comes down to splitting less than a second over cumulatively over, like, do we have to do a slightly faster fade on this song to gain an extra 2 or 3 seconds of time?
Yeah.
It actually came down to that much of a critical process.
Right. Right.
And that was, if I'm not mistaken, at the end of 91, I think we, Halloween day or eve, or right in that week, we were working diligently in Bernie Grunman's mastering when he was
That makes sense, because if it was released November 26th,
right.
yeah, you would have been hustling during Halloween.
And that's when Bernie was still on Sunset Boulevard.
All right. Next
And,
to Ocean Way, yeah, our building, that's right.
exactly. And that was, I mean, that was very hectic because everybody wanted to make everything work.
Yeah.
And Michael wanted as much as he could. So he'd listen to an edit and then it would come back, well, we still need to get rid of 12 more seconds or something. And then they would re-edit and then Michael would listen to see if that was acceptable to him.
Yeah.
So there was very little celebrating.
There was
There was
little time.
there was no time. We were in the middle of problem solving.
So the remember the time. So let's see, the album produced 4 singles that reached top 10 of Billboard 100. Remember the Time, In the Closet, Will You Be There, and the #1 single, Black or White.
Yes.
The ballads, Keep the Faith, composed by Jackson, Saida Garrett, and Glenn Ballard, and the self-composed Will You Be There and Sounds of Gospel, while Heal the World and Gone Too Soon were softer pop ballads. Gone Too Soon by Larry Grossman and Buzz Cohen is a tribute to Ryan White following his death due to AIDS in 1990. And the Dangerous cover was painted by American artist Mark Ryden. Did any of the album artwork conversations come up while you were working? Or
well, it did. Those of us working in the studio,
yeah.
We all were very aware of Michael's likes and his dislikes in terms of the kinds of art that he likes. And at that time, he was enamored with P.T. Barnum. So when you see the Dangerous cover,
That's right.
P.T. Barnum is on the cover. And there's a lot of symbolism in all these little kinds of things because you can really get into all the details of that.
Amazing, yeah.
Which was what Michael wanted to do. Michael wanted to make it very colorful and a kind of like a 3-ring circus of different influences and different kinds of activities.
It displays Jackson's eyes and a single lock of his hair behind a gold masquerade mask. The face of a chimpanzee, which may be Jackson's pet, Bubbles, atop the mask, and a dog and a bird wearing royal clothing sitting on the left and right side of the cover, respectively.
Yes. All of these things, if you can go in there, and the artist did a phenomenal job of finding out things about Michael, the people Michael loved, the creatures, his pets, his influences. In all of these things are in some fashion reflected in the artwork of the cover.
Wonder why the name Dangerous. There's no song title by that name, is there?
There is.
There is. Okay.
There is.
Okay. So that was one of the singles? Or
I don't
think it became, yeah.
I don't believe it did. That was originally a song that Michael started with Billy Bottrell, and then later that version of it morphed, and Teddy Riley came in, and Teddy added a little bit of his kind of twist, his kind of New Jack Swing feel to that. So then that was the version that was released on the Dangerous album, and then the other version ended up as a bonus track on one of the compilations much later.
Well, I want to thank you for these memories. Do you have any personal thoughts or memories from him, one-on-one? Were there any? Did you ever have conversations outside of the album world, music world?
Yeah.
What were some things that he would talk to you about?
Family.
Yeah.
Importance of family.
Yeah.
At that same time, there was the first Gulf War. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait.
Wow.
That was a topical thing of the moment.
So politics interested him.
Well, Michael just didn't understand why, necessity of war.
Uh-huh.
We would have discussions about that. His social conscious side.
Absolutely, yeah.
We would discuss topics in things of the moment like that, and then some of Michael's more personal things. So he would always like to talk about people and people's families. He would ask about my daughter.
I remember that.
There was, do you remember the assistant engineer, Bart?
Yeah.
What was his name?
Are you thinking, let's say Brad Sundberg, Rail Rogard, and Dan Bosworth were
Right,
there.
but there was another assistant engineer. His name was Bart.
Huh.
And he started the project, but then he developed a problem. I think he had to have a heart valve replaced.
Oh, you're
And
absolutely right.
I
Was
forgot his
not
last
there a
name.
long time. You're absolutely right.
He was with us for quite a while,
Yeah.
but then after
Oh,
the
what was his last name? I
the,
know exactly. Yeah.
the medical issue, and he had to have the surgery for it,
Yeah.
I think his doctor said, you know, that job that you have, that you work 12, 14 hours a day,
It's not conducive.
that's
Yeah.
not gonna fit in the a picture of how what you need to take care of yourself to recover.
And did
And I
Michael
remember
notice that, or Michael paid attention to that?
oh no, Michael would talk to him about it.
Hmm. Wow. That's so kind.
Yeah, it was, and I remember he had a nephew, or there was some family relative that Bart uh, that was part of Bart's family. I remember him coming over, and Michael was very kind to him and said, "Oh yeah, you can hang out here." And
Hmm.
you know, all the young kids, it wouldn't be uncommon for Michael to have some of his nieces and nephews in tow if they would you know, come to the studio on a particular day. In terms of a daily routine, there was never a given set pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It was all variable in terms of what are we dealing with, what are we addressing, what point of development is a song in, and do we
So you
need
had to be ready for just about everything. Constant
absolutely,
surprises.
absolutely. And we might all show up at the studio thinking one thing, and Michael would show up and say, "Oh, we're going to do something, something." So the day would change in mid-course.
Yeah.
But that was part of the challenge, because whatever it was, we knew it would be exciting and a challenge.
Well, that was a very special album and a special decade, the
Yeah.
90s. Thank you again.